Hey all, James David Writing III, sound editor, sound designer, re-recording, and mixer. I want to show you one way in which I use Krotos Igniter. All right, this is how I use Krotos Igniter in an ad for my client, Anthony Pietro Monaco. Anthony always has great visuals and always willing to collaborate on making great sound design. And this ad happened to lend itself beautifully to Krotos Igniter. And what I'm going to show you today is making the sound for this little automated robot here. This robot comes out and stops and then moves to the side and goes up. And these are automated robots for this company that is going to be building pods to change out car batteries for electric vehicles, almost like a gas station. So this doesn't exactly exist yet, and we have to come up with what it sounds like. Now, we wanted it to be smooth and we wanted it to be sleek, but it also had to be automated. And so I thought it would have a unlock sound and then a slide forward and then a lock in place sound. And that's what we're going to do today with Krotos Igniter. So if you don't know Igniter yet, definitely check it out. It's got so many cool things to it. They have a load of presets already in here that if you wanted to just go with real world cars, you could. If you wanted to do helicopters, you could do Foley with it in cars. You could do sci-fi vehicles, sirens, everything. They got a bunch of cool stuff. We're not going to use a preset today. This is something that I needed to create just for this ad. So I went to clean start. And again, wanting it to be something sleek and sort of high-endish, what I'm going to start with is going to the Granular library over here. You have 4 different tabs here in which you can do different types of design elements with. The first one being Granular, in which you can take any of the Granular library that Krotos has supplied and drop in the sounds to the engine or exhaust ports. And what's great about that is that then you can control their RPMs and their load. And you can even make it sound like an automatic or manual transmission. And it's really cool. In this case, you'd be like, wait, this is a robot. Why are we putting an engine sound? Because it adds a nice texture element to the sound. And that's what I really liked about it. So I'm going to go with the Audi R8 engine here. And I'm going to go with the Aston Martin over here. Both the times I'm taking the engine because I want the airiness to it. That's just a quality that I want on it. Take a listen. And then I'm going to put an EQ on here and shelf it off. So I have a shelf just to take off some of that top end. Right? Now if I take the RPM from the granular and drag it over to the modulation, I can control it with the master rev section here. And this becomes important later because this line here helps me automate the sounds. So if I take the RPM and drop it over here, I can get this really cool rev sound and control over here. Now, I also wanted to control the load because that's going to help deviate the sound a little bit. And I'm going to take the load. I don't want it to drop all the way down to 0, and I don't want it to go all the way up to 100. But it's going to follow this same line here. So if you watch over here, that load and that RPM, you'll see them going together with the RPMs. Cool. Now we saw on the robot before that robot sort of starts up, comes and stops, right? So I'm going to automate that sound. I'm going to automate that with this line right here in the mod section. And I'm going to pull it down so that when we go all the way through with the RPMs, it's going to be at 0 and come back to 0. And in the middle, I'm going to put a hump. I'm going to put a little bit of a bump there. And by doing that, now I can just ride all the way through the RPM, start to finish, and it'll go up and down. All right, so I'm really liking the way that's working. Next thing I kind of want to do is I want to add a little more smoothness to it, and I'm going to change the shuffle depth to do that. Make it a little less steppy, allow it to jump around a little bit more in the sound. And same with the RPM smoothing. I'm going to up that a bit. Somewhere around there. All right, not bad. It's still a little static sounding to me. I wanted to give it a little more dynamics. So another thing that we can control is the mix between the two engines, right? So we have the R8 and the Aston Martin, both have very different sounds. And what I want to do is play with this mix as the robot moves. So we can take this again and put it in here, and I can limit how far it goes in the mix between the two. I can go somewhere in there like that. All right, I'm liking that. It's giving us enough little movement in it. It's changing the sound a little bit. The load is causing it to sound like the robot maybe has a little bit of restraint, a little bit of torque on it. So that's sounding pretty good to start us off. Now I'm going to mute this because otherwise we're just going to be hearing the granular engine the whole time. And we're going to switch over to synth next. With the synth tab, we can add up to 5 different oscillators with different blends of waveforms, allowing us to create even more unique sounds. In this case, I'm going to turn on our first one, and you can hear that it's got a nice little buzz to it because it's a mix between this ramp and sine wave. And we're going to change it a little bit. We're going to make it a triangle and a sine. We're going to drop it down to 60 hertz, and we're going to blend it a little bit more, just so it has a little bit of an edge to it. Excellent. And then I'm going to turn on the frequency modulation, in which you can change the amount of modulation caused by another frequency. We're just going to add a little bit of extra buzz to this all. Awesome. And then that's working pretty good for me. We're going to turn on another one and change this up to square wave with the ramp. Give it a little more zappiness, I think. Again, add some frequency modulation to it. We're also going to add some vibrato. And some amplitude modulation to it. Alright, so that's working pretty well for me for adding an extra element to our engine. Let's put in the engine sound. Alright, 2 issues with this though. One issue is that sound is very static. It's very just buzz, buzz, buzz the whole time in your ear. And that doesn't add itself to the movement of the robot. It would be great if we wanted to just add it as part of a element of the background of the factory, but that's not what we're doing here. We're doing the robot movement. So we're going to do a couple of things here. We're going to go to mod 2 here because we can add a separate line for our buzzes, right? And in here, I'm going to take the gain for oscillator 1 and the gain for oscillator 2, and I'm going to just tweak that a little bit and do the similar thing that we did to the RPMs for the granular engine. And we're going to pull it all the way down to 0. So this way the gain starts at 0 and will come up and then go back down to 0 as we go across our timeline. Right, so just to take a listen to that. Okay, so that's giving us something. It's not really giving us movement, but now we can add another effect. And what's great is here in this mixer section here, we can add separate effects for each tab. So granular, we put an EQ on. Under the synth, we're going to put on Doppler. And it's great because we can automatically have Doppler follow across with our timeline in the mod section. So in this case, I'm going to go to mod 3. I don't necessarily want it going left and right. I'm going to leave that up to the final mix. I do want to add some movement though, and by adding some Doppler with the y-axis, the forward and back axis, I can give it that sense of movement without having it going left or right, which is great. So I'm going to take the source y and throw it up on my mod here. By throwing that up on my mod, I can now control how far I want that to go past the center point and how far away I want it to go from our sound. So now, if we now we get this cool Doppler effect happening with it. I'm going to ramp the synth up a little bit. That's great. We can change the roll off, the slope, the distance, all these things. I think I like the sound of this though. I think it's working pretty well. Let's hear it with the engine sound. All right, so our engine's a little loud. Let's knock that back down again. Okay, I'm getting into that. I like that. Let's put the Doppler also on our granular engine. Let's have them match up. Take that. Actually, we'll let the granular engine go a little further away so that way it dies more. So here we go. All right, so now we're getting some great movement to our sound. I'm really enjoying that. It's really working well for me. So the next thing that we're going to move on to is the one-shot tab. And this is a great tab to add in those extra little, tire screeches if you're going to be doing a peel out. In this case, we're going to use the one-shot to do the lock and unlock sound of the robot that we have. All right, so with the one-shot, we can pick up to 4 different samples that we can trigger along the timeline as we do our master revs. They give us a great library of sound files, plus you can also go and find your own files that you'd like to use. They give us Foleys and all sorts of other ways to do it. I want to use, well, that's a little big. I don't mind that, so why don't we take this and drag it over here. And we're going to go just for this little piece here in the beginning, just that unlocking sound or that locking sound. I like that. And up here on the timeline, we can go ahead and add our trigger points. And if you double click, you add an arrow that automatically triggers when going to the right. If you click that again, it's now triggering when going to the left. Click it one more time, you have it triggering in both directions. And one more, you stop the sound. In this case, we want it to trigger when we're going to the right, but we also wanted to be able to trigger it when we're going to the left. So we can go down here and add another arrow in the opposite direction there. Now when we trigger it with our revs, so that works out pretty well for us, but I feel like it's not quite enough of a sound. I think maybe we want something else. And one of the ones I like to use, if we go to Foley and helicopters, we have these Huey cockpit Foleys, and I like this one. Just has this extra clunk to it. It's pretty cool. So we're going to take that and drag it into 2. And you can control what speed your samples are playing back at and what gain they're playing back, which you can do with either a knob or with an envelope. And in this case, we're going to take the envelope of our speed and we're going to just cram it right around there so it starts off a little slow and then gets up to speed faster. And we can do a little bit extra modulation there. And then we're going to trigger this. We want this to trigger in both directions. So I'm going to put the diamond on both sides so that it triggers both directions here. And I'm going to knock down the volume of this one because we don't need it quite so big. Let's take a listen. not bad, but I think I want to knock the volume down a little bit more, get the speed down a little bit more, and have it ramp up a little faster. All right, and I don't think we need that last lock part. We think we just need the big clunk. All right. I like that. By that, just knock down overall the one-shot volume. There we go. So our one shot is acting as our lock and unlock mechanism for our robot. Last section we need to go to is the loop section. Now I tend to use the loop section in cars when I'm adding in like tire grit or suspension bumps, something that I kind of want as a constant throughout, but maybe like a little rattle or something, or even an extra engine sound. The loop section has 4 different sections that it can crossfade between as it goes across the timeline. I'm going to go in and take off the filters that I had before from my library, and I'm going to find and go into loops here. And now, again, I want something a little different. It's not supposed to be a car engine. It's not supposed to be an airplane engine or anything like that. I have found using the Challenger sounds here have really helped this sound out. So we can drag and drop them in here, and you instantly get blasted with noise, which is always fun. Just kidding. I muted it there for a second here. I like that one, and I like the next one. What ends up happening is that you get 2 different sounds that you can blend between. Just like we did the blend on the Granular mix between the 2 engines, we're going to do the same thing with our loop section here and add a different element to it. And we're going to go to mod 4 here so that we can change our loop position, which will be very nice to do. And since I'm only going to use the first 2 loop positions, I want it so that our timeline goes between the first one, second one, and back to first one. So grab loop position here, pull it over to the parameter section of the mod, and we're going to drop down so that we go back to the beginning and come up so that we go to 2. And we're going to limit it here just to make sure that we don't go too far. And what's great is that we just mute all these guys here. What's great is we can just go through and see where it's going. Oh, it's going a little too far into 3 there. Okay, well, we don't need to go that far into 3, so let's drop it down a little bit. Now let's see where we go. Oh, there we go. We just kissed the edge of 3, the crossfade there, and then come back. Let's take a listen and see how that sounds for us. All right, we could use a little better crossfade between these 2 sounds. And we could also use something with these sounds that causes them to come and go. Now we could do it with the Doppler again. That worked really well for our synth and our granular. Let's go to mod 5 and let's do something different, because you can take these individual mix elements and you can add them to the parameters here. And what's great about this is that, again, we can control how they react, and we can have them come up and go away the way we want. So you can see that it's coming up and going back down. Let's take a listen and see how that is. All right, so we get a little bit too much of 2 and not enough of 1. So let's bring our crossfade that way maybe and take a listen. Not bad, not bad. Let's maybe push that up and limit how much we go. Maybe we don't let it drop all the way down to 0. There we go. Now add all of them together. So that's sounding pretty good to me. Let's take a look and see how it works with our robot. Let's see if we can do this. Oh, that was my own bad, see? Okay, I'm liking that. That sort of gives us the sound of the robot moving forward here. Okay, now let's do something that actually makes it follow the robot. Okay, so what's great with Igniter is that we can automate everything that we just played with. And if we go over here, we can set up and go up to master RPM. And if we go here, we know we want to start there. So we can go ahead and put an automation point there. And then we want it to stop down the road, or the track, so to say, right about there. Let's make sure. Looks like that is the frame that we stop on. So go ahead and write a point there. And we know at that point we want it to go all the way up to 1. And so when we use the power of automation, we can time it perfectly with our robot. That's just one way I use Krotos Igniter, and that's just scratching the surface. Until next time.